And our top focus of this hour is on the G7 summit. We're learning that Donald Trump will be leaving the G7 summit midway. He'll be leaving shortly for Washington, D.C. And that means that no Modi-Trump meeting will be there as Trump rushes home. Setback to India-US trade talks as Donald Trump is cutting short his G7 summit trip to Canada. He's leaving for Washington, D.C. early in the background of Iran-Israel conflict that is only escalating. Iran-Israel war clouds Canada G7 summit. White House war room also awaits Trump. So that's a big update that is coming in. Donald Trump is all set to leave the G7 summit midway. He'll be rushing back to Washington, D.C. This is with regards to the Israel-Iran conflict that is escalating with no signs of de-escalation. Although Iran has now offered ceasefire, but Donald Trump has already made a decision to rush back to Washington, D.C. He has cited quote-unquote obvious reasons for leaving the G7 summit midway. So, which means that all eyes were on the likely bilateral between India and United States. It was expected it was likely that Modi and Trump bilateral could have taken place on the sidelines of the G7 summit, but that is not a possibility now as Donald Trump is now rushing back to Washington, D.C. With regard to the Israel-Iran war, the escalating tensions between the two countries, and Donald Trump has said that he needs to reach Washington, D.C. as soon as possible. India Today's Gaurav Sawant is in Calgary tracking all the updates of G7 summit. Gaurav, Prime Minister Modi has landed in Calgary. All eyes are now on the G7 summit and also the likely bilateral on the sidelines of the G7 summit. How does Prime Minister Modi's itinerary look like today?
So it's a packed day for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. If you look at it right from the word go, he has a series of bilaterals that are likely. A lot of it depends, of course, also on scheduling. For example, there is a bilateral that's on the cards with Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy. There's one with Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. There could be a pull aside with US President Donald Trump, of course, depending on whether both sides can find time for this. There's also one with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that's on the cards. So there are multiple engagements between Prime Minister Narendra at bilateral level and also at multilateral level. The fact that India is not a member of G7 and yet was invited, that all the 7 members of G7 wanted Prime Minister Narendra Modi here. Mark Carney mentioned the importance of India to supply chains, to being the 5th largest economy on our way to being the 4th and then the 3rd. And the bilateral with Mark Carney, that again will be a very major reset in India-Canada ties. Remember, in the times of Justin Trudeau, this relationship had gone downhill because of baseless allegations that Justin Trudeau had leveled against elements in government of India. And Prime Minister did not take very kindly to it. Baseless allegations not backed up by any evidence. And that's the question I've been putting to people here in Canada. What was that so-called evidence that Canada has been able to gather after 1 year of making those allegations in the Niger case? But even today, there is no evidence in public domain. So, Anjali, can you imagine that you have a relationship between two countries, India and Canada, both very powerful countries, which go downhill because of allegations made on the basis of some intelligence assessment or inputs that may have come from Five Eyes? Nothing that's admissible in a court of law, and yet action was sought to be taken against top diplomats, and the high commissioners of both countries had to be recalled. Now there is an intelligence sharing and investigations cooperation that is being worked out between the two countries. The two heads of government will be working on that to ensure that, one, there is intelligence sharing on terrorism, 2, on investigations, 3, on enforcement agencies, human trafficking, drug trafficking. It remains a big challenge for Canada. India can really help in investigations like it is, even in the United States of America. So there's lots that's on the cards for Prime Minister Narendra Modi in the next 24 hours.
Absolutely, Gaurav. All eyes are on the bilateral between India and Canada amid the strained ties. But people were also anticipating the bilateral between India and US, which seems unlikely now. So, can this be seen as a setback to India-US trade ties?
Not really, because India and US both realize that this is a very important strategic partnership between India and the United States of America. Can there still be a pull aside? Last minute things they continue to be worked out. There is a trade agreement that we are told both sides say it's in final stages and could be in soon. It's not just in America's interest, it's also in India's interest to have that agreement. And this is something that India has been making clear to the United States. Any relationship works when there's a win-win for all sides in it, and both India and America realize that the strategic partnership is advantageous to both. However, it cannot be at the cost of one for the other. There are two major issues that India is repeatedly taking up with the United States of America. One is Pakistan's state-sponsored radical Islamist terror. That is something that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also emphatically expected to take up tomorrow, cross-border terrorism and the role of state sponsors of terror and countries in Europe and the United States of America. Both Europe and the United States of America cannot afford to have double standards on this. So these are, again, very powerful issues that will come up. Do keep one thing in mind. India being the fourth largest economy on our way to being the third largest economy carries a different kind of heft. The fact that India is able to look after 800 million people in our own country, bringing them out of poverty or feeding them is something that Europe and America are also very keenly looking at. India's technology push in terms of direct benefit transfer is something that is being looked at, as of course is India's weapons industry, that cooperation with countries like Cyprus, with Armenia, that's a shot in the arm for India. So it's a different India that we see on the world stage today. There are challenges, there will be niggles, but something that India is negotiating very deftly.
Absolutely, Gaurav.